Hello, everybody. My name is Alex. You might know me as Midgeman, and I'm the production lead on Radio Kaiserreich, as well as the voice of Nicholas Faircrest. I'd like to take this moment before the episode to thank everybody for their support of Kaiser Cat Cinema. The situation around the world right now is a really tough time for the arts and the creative industry, so your support, even just by watching and listening to these broadcasts, really helps us out. Many people within the creative arts industry, myself included, work on a freelance basis, and for whom many opportunities right now have either fallen through or completely collapsed. So if you do have the means right now and you want to do something to help the arts industry, consider supporting a local relief fund, donating to an arts charity, or a local theatre, or art gallery or museum, or even consider becoming a patron of Kaiser Cat Cinema. Just support somewhere that likes to create creative work and support the arts in this troubled time. All right, that's the preachy, talky bit done. Let's get on with episode 3. Thank you for listening.
It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there.
Fellow Britons, we must interrupt your regular broadcast of Albion Air to bring you this devastating news. At 7:15 this morning, Thomas Edward Lawrence passed away following a motorcycle accident during a trip along the Jurassic Coast. A state funeral has been arranged in London for next Monday, to which all men and women are invited. Until then, flags will remain at half-mast to commemorate a man who, while short in stature, was possessed of a spirit which dwarfed that of even the greatest of men. In his honor, for the first half of this morning's program, we shall be playing several old radio clips. These clips highlight the world which we have forged today. A world which Winston Churchill once stated would never have ever been possible, but for an avalanche of heroism that we saw throughout this decade. That avalanche would not have been possible if not for the small stone, the catalyst that was T.E. Lawrence. We will start today's tributes with the first broadcast ever to feature Mr. Lawrence. A day which many have come to believe shaped the modern world. Welcome, comrades, back to another broadcast. It is my duty to inform you that on this day, April 28th, at 4:30 p.m., RED Commander T.E. Lawrence, along with a handful of brave commandos, stormed the TUC, ending the Black Boot Revolution. The details on how this all came to transpire are spotty at best, but from what our investigators and friends have told us, at noon today, a group of students created a human chain before the doors of Oxford University in order to stop Black Boot thugs from arresting Professor C.S. Lewis. When ordered to open fire upon the students, several RED commandos, along with Mr. Lawrence, turned their arms against their former comrades. Mr. Mosley was captured by Lawrence and his fellow freedom fighters attempting to commit suicide. He is to be held in the Tower of London under heavy guard until his trial. In the meantime, Lawrence has been sworn in as the new commandant. He has announced that he intends to root out the extremism and hatred that has, for too long, infected our home islands. Our sources indicate that he has already sent letters to the exiles in Canada in hopes of extending an olive branch and coming to a peaceful resolution to the revolution of 1925. Our second tribute is from the last ever official broadcast of the People's Voice, a broadcast which had several interesting letters sent to yours truly, as well as the government itself. Welcome back, comrades, or should I say, fellow countrymen, to another special news bulletin. Talks between the exiles in Canada and our own delegates have found historic success. For the first time in nearly a decade, a member of the House of Windsor walks upon the blessed shores of their homeland. King Edward VIII, along with Mr. Lawrence and several Union leaders, met yesterday evening in Buckingham Palace. They met to discuss the terms of the return of the king and exiles. Reporters were not permitted to access the meeting, but a reliable source claims that the plans made will be fair and amenable for everyone involved. Later that evening, during a speech on London Bridge to the public, the exiled king called up Commandant Lawrence and bestowed upon him, to great excitement from the gathered crowds, the Victoria Cross for supreme bravery and loyalty in the face of incomprehensible odds. After this, he called up the ex-RED commandos, awarding them all with the new Georgian Medallion for protecting the students and preserving the peace and humanity on our fair island. The king closed the event with a speech, the closing remarks of which stated, "The time of austerity and tyranny is over. The people of Britain, through sheer will and determination, have changed the course of history yet again, with aims of peace and harmony. Our island will now return as a jewel that shines on the face of this earth, rather than a stain that lies in the shadows. Lawrence and his men have put the pride that we once all felt, back in our hearts. Hold your heads up high, people of Britain. Today is a new day." breaking news from the palace for all you Windsor aficionados out there. After what has been described as a textbook delivery, there is now a new member to join the royal family. That's right, at 2:45 p.m., Princess Mary Lawrence Josephine Sophie Windsor was born at Balmoral Castle. His Royal Highness King Edward VIII has invited the entire public to her baptism at Westminster Abbey, the Sunday after next, stating that while my son's birth was overshadowed by the spectre of war looming on the horizon, my daughter's shall not. In this era of peace and prosperity for the Empire, we must ensure that we do not forget the small, happy moments which define us. What happy news to receive on what has so far been an all-around somber day. Next on our tribute list, whilst not featuring the hero of the hour himself, it is considered widely to have been only achievable due to the examples set by Mr. Lawrence on a world scale. Breaking news out of the United States today. The recently elected president, Floyd Olson, has done what many politicians and experts deemed impossible. After months of careful political maneuvering and several close shaves, the president, along with Senators Huey Long and John Jack Reed, have finally come to an agreement over the future of the United States. In a speech before Congress Hall, the three men announced, among other matters, the disarming of both the Minutemen and the Red Guard, as well as announcing that the United States would no longer sit idly and allow the use of terror and violence to subvert the democratic process. It would seem that for the second time this decade, peace and freedom has prevailed over the fear and the hatred. With this momentous occurrence, one can only really be hopeful for the future. A new politically active America will soon be seeking new friends on the world stage. And who better, if I may say so, than the Entente, who has been dedicated to the pursuit of freedom since even before the Weltkrieg. Peace in Europe was not something that many of us could, simply have dreamed of. Even after the toppling of the tyrannical government, at home the looming spectre of extremism was present in the commune to our south. However, it seems that Mr. Lawrence's spectre loomed larger, even stretching all the way across the channel. Good afternoon, listeners. You join us on a glorious day for Europe. In an astounding turn of events, a recent referendum in the Commune of France has led to the ousting of the violent Jacobin government. No doubt inspired in some small way by our own victory over totalism, the bureaucratic class and the lower government organizers came together to hold Chairman Marcel Diet accountable for his violent and totalitarian policies. These figures banded together from across all political fronts in the General Labor Exchange and managed to force through a referendum on the state of their nation. When put to the people, the decision was made that with the election of Ferdinand Boisson and his extension of rights and protections across the nation, it would be preferable to dissolve the Commune and unite with the old government in exile. The Jacobin leadership denounced the referendum as an act of treason, declaring its outcome void. They were, however, arrested by Police Union Chair Marc Cormier on charges of corruption and attempted election tampering prior to any action on their part. President Bousson has made no statement on the nation's new path. I must interject again in our coverage of the memorial for General Lawrence with more breaking news from Russia, continuing on from the previous weeks. The new Vozhd, Boris Savinkov, has continued his reclamation of rightful Russian land. After defeating the resurgent Bolsheviks last year, he has slowly moved troops east to the steppes of Central Asia. Hours ago, he reportedly sent a telegram of unknown content to the Turkic Khan. There is yet to be a response from the Khanate, but it is suspected that they, like the Cossacks and Azerbaijani, will soon enough be joining the Russian state. The Vozhd has already been rattling his saber at both the Japanese and German empires. It is suspected that no matter the outcomes of future diplomacy, it may end up that this new revanchist, expansionist Russia may bring about the next great war. And God help us all if it does. We will be looking further into the Russian crisis in tomorrow's broadcast. And now back to our memoriam scheduling. This next broadcast has less to do with Lawrence himself, and again, instead, the legacy of peace which he himself was a champion of, even in the tumultuous Balkan states. News out of the Austrian Empire today. In the wake of the Ausgleich and ensuing civil war, Emperor Karl I of Austria has proclaimed a new Danubian Federation. Under the precedent of self-rule and autonomy under the crown, the emperor has thus divided the empire into provinces, with larger degrees of local autonomy, each ruled by the local ethnic and cultural majorities, but guided by his hand. With this historical union has come the answer to the long-standing fate of the Balkans. With the Austrian Empire now unified under one common purpose, the extremist groups in the region should be maintained. There are already groups in Greece and Romania clamoring for their governments to accept the emperor's invitation to the Federation and its sphere of influence. Anzac veterans and leadership were ecstatic to hear this news, remembering the fierce fighting at Gallipoli and the Dardanelles. During the last war, the idea of peace in the Balkans was thought a dream that none could achieve, and yet, today we see just that. Tomorrow we'll be talking to an Anzac veteran of this war. Our last tribute broadcast before returning to regular news was a momentous occasion, which is widely considered to have been the most important political event since the end of the Weltkrieg. Exciting news from the Zurich Conference. The talks have been a miraculous success. Delegates from each member, both the Entente and the International, have finally come to a satisfactory agreement, with both Britain and France's return to the Entente. Many of the International's delegates were worried that they would be expected to reform their governments into the more traditional republics. However, with the integrating of socialism into both the democratic structures of the UK and France, the main talking point was focused on the citizens' rights to choose. Thus, the Zurich Pact was signed today, declaring that, whilst not a formal alliance, the signatories of the Zurich Pact would be expected to come to the defense of one another should a foreign threat arise, with aims of the revocation of those citizens' rights. The current signatory nations and delegates are as follows: the United Kingdom, represented by Prince Albert; the Republic of France by Albert Sarraut; the Australasian Confederation by Jesse M. Street; the Dominion of India by Laqut Ali Khan; the Dominion of Canada by John Diefenbaker; the Dominion of Ireland by Liam Mellows; the Swedish Commune by Carl Kildum; the Norwegian Union by Ragnar Frisch; the Union of Denmark by Alfred Jensen; the Socialist Republic of Italy by Achille Grandi; the Iberian Federation by Salvador de Madrigal, and the United States of America by Quentin Roosevelt. Already, the political correspondents and experts have been hailing this as the start of not only peace in Europe, but most probably peace in our world. That was not some blind statement I made then. I still feel today, especially with the work that Mr. Lawrence did to assure our own public freedoms, that our world is on a better path. He was a truly great man. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention today as we have paid homage to the late, great T.E. Lawrence. Now, however, it is time that we return to the events of today. But first, this. We begin our regular news broadcast with a continuation story from last week on the Italian debacle. The President of Italy and ANI leader, Italo Balbo, has finally caved to international pressure, and the election which he had cancelled will be held early next month. No comments were received from himself, but one of his aides stated that this new crypto-syndicalist alliance has finally succeeded in tearing down the only truly honest leader in Europe. In a letter to the people, Mr. Balbo announced that he would be retiring from politics, as he could not stand to live in a world where the true sons of Rome lived under the boots of the Austrian and syndicalist menace. An anonymous source within the Foreign Office expressed their shock that the president was able to be cowed, even with all of Europe standing united against him. They have also expressed their pleasure at his compliance, stating that, had he not, this could have turned into an international conflict, which could have had severe repercussions. More on that as it progresses. As many of our regular listeners know, we here at Albion Air are very proud of the part that Britain has played in the Zurich Pact, and as well the many steps it has made to preserve peace, not only for our own people, but those abroad as well. It would be a great disservice to our allies if I did not report on their achievements as well. The day has finally dawned after years of being stonewalled by the old Kaiser the French foreign minister will be meeting with the newly crowned Kaiser Wilhelm III later this month in Vienna to discuss entry to the Zurich Pact for Germany and its client states. Many members of the Zurich Pact, including the Americans and the Austrians, have attempted to convince the old Kaiser to enter talks with our governments, but he had been too tied up in the old grudges to even come to the table. It is wonderful to see that with this new regime in Berlin, that a modern and diplomatic man is at the helm. If all goes well with these talks, Europe will see itself brought into a union of states, which can hopefully preserve the peace that has been fought for so dearly. We will be back with more news of the new German regime after this quick break. welcome back. I severely hope you enjoyed that little ditty. But now is the time to bring out one of our two guests for the evening. Dr. Friedrich Schierstadt, a medical officer assigned to the German Imperial Army garrison in Tsingtao. How are you this evening, Doctor?
Good, Herr Faircrest. Danke for having me this evening.
The pleasure is all mine. It is not every day we have someone here who can give us a first-hand account of such a monumental world event.
I assume you are talking about the recent Nanking conference, yeah?
Yes, the very same.
Well, I was amongst the retinue of General Falkenhausen during his meetings with President Chen Jiaming and Prince Takamatsu in order to effect the reorganization of East Asia. It was not a short meeting, and all three leaders had come with large arrays of troops.
That doesn't sound promising, Doctor. Were you worried it would come to blows?
Many times, especially when the Japanese delegation was offended that the Kaiser did not come himself, as was intended. Even so, their own emperor did not attend either. The delegations had several different ideas on how the Far East should have been
But
reorganized.
from what we have heard, the talks ended in a success. Is it true that both the Japanese and the German armies are pulling out of China?
Well, ja and nein. After severe mismanagement in the wake of the Black Monday crisis and the following resecuring of the concessions territories, many of the territories were either seized by the local Chinese or were reoccupied by the previous European owners.
Yes, but rumors had it that after Chun Fang's unification of central China, both Germany and Japan were considering backing out.
Nein, both the Kaiser and the Emperor intend on maintaining their colonial regions. However, with the loss of Indochina and Manchuria, neither side has a foothold large enough to press any of their claims, especially not with China united under Chun Fang.
I am surprised that these Chinese have not demanded the returns of their old colonial holdings. Is there any word on the desires for them?
Not that I am allowed to share publicly. I can say, however, that this will not be the last conference in the East.
Well, you mentioned before the show that you will not be taking part in any further negotiations. Why is that?
Well, Herr Faircrest, I have served the Kaiser since before the Weltkrieg. I am getting on in years, and it is time for my retirement. With the warming relations between Canada and Germany, I think it's about time for me to visit some extended families there.
Oh, you have family in Canada. How long have you known of that?
Well, I have always known that my great-grandfather left for the New World, but I never knew where he landed. But it would seem that his descendants are still alive in Canada, and the youngest Arthur decided to research into the family and sent me a letter inviting me to visit.
Oh, lovely. And obviously you intend on using your retirement to see them.
Well, actually, I intend on settling down there. My wife and I decided that since both of our sons are still in the army, we would stay there. Probably somewhere by the sea. Canada is being made easier by the Zurich Pact. I see no reason why I shouldn't spend my retirement somewhere a little different. After all, I have been assigned to Astasian for almost 10 years now. I will spend the next 10 in the far west.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to meet with me this evening, Doctor. And good luck on your travels.
Danke, Herr Faircrest. God bless you and yours.
And now for the last segment of today's broadcast. We have a special treat for you all in light of the recent tragic death of General Lawrence. We have invited Professor Abigail Francesca Pinette, head of the Oxford Department of History, to come and tell us all a little story. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you for having me on, Mr. Faircrest. Are there any specific events you would want me to theorise on?
Why don't you just give us the outcome you see as most likely?
Well then, we must go back to 1936. The way I see it, the peace we are now living in is nearly impossible. It's almost as though God himself came down and essentially ensured that the perfect sequence of events came about for a peaceful world. First off, the fact that President Olson managed to keep a coalition government together and get elected was something that no political expert could ever have expected. Most likely we would have seen a much less tactful establishment candidate take over, and a civil war would have broken out, forcing another decade at least of American isolationism. Speaking of elections, the chances of both Mosley and Deet being elected to the Commune and Union were astronomically low. Most likely we would have seen two more syndicalist governments controlling the nations, thereby ensuring a war with both the Germans and the Entente.
How can you be so sure of all of this?
Well, everything that happened this century was remarkable. It is uncommon to see major political change happen in such a small period of time in so many regions. After the Vilkrieg, many new orders were both established and normalised. The syndicalist government in France and here in Great Britain were not hated by the population, and the chances of two violent dictators coming to power and staying there in a democratically elected society like theirs was one that could be assumed. Most likely we would have seen a peaceful transition, even if Mosley had still won the election. Lawrence's coup was not guaranteed to succeed after all.
And perish the thought of that failing. But what about the Entente powers? Surely they could have managed to keep the peace?
Well, actually, both in France and Canada, things could have gone remarkably differently. Pétain not only unsuspended the constitution and allowed the Socialist Party to run in a free election, but also lost to them. Considering most of the government in exile at the time and population were incredibly revanchist, rivaling only their distaste for Germans after the disastrous Battle of Sedan, it would have been much more likely to see the Republican Party, or even more likely the Action Française, win that election. Meanwhile in Canada, Bill C-7 was a massive stroke of luck. It passed by such a slim margin in the House that some people believed that Prime Minister King himself was the deciding vote, while the exiles in the Senate, rumour has it, only accepted it as is due to several major concessions offered up by the Prime Minister in private. With the temperament of King Edward, directly after the death of his father, who knows how he would have reacted to the Liberals failing yet another stabilising bill? With the way His Majesty had addressed the nations weeks prior, he may have dissolved Parliament altogether, and we could have seen a dramatically altered Canadian perspective towards the Home Isles.
Well, if all of that had come to pass, where do you think the world would be right now?
Well, no one can say for certain, but if I were to hazard a guess at all this, I would say we would still be in the middle of the Second Great War, one which would likely have 4, if not 5, participants.
4 or 5 participants? And who exactly would the participants of this Second Great War be?
Well, obviously the Entente would be attempting to reclaim their old territories, most likely with His Majesty guiding a much more, shall we say, militaristic government, backed by a France in exile under either Pétain himself or perhaps even a restored Bourbon crown.
Do you really believe that the French would have appealed to the laws of exile?
It is not unlikely, especially if the Action Française had won the election. On that note, the second side to that war would very obviously be the International, led by France but buoyed by Mosley's Britain, a syndicalist Italy, the Spanish, Norway and the Swedes. The entrance of the Nordic nations into the international and French revanchism would lead then to the Germans acting as the third great power in the war.
That would be 3 major powers. What about the 4th and the 5th?
Well, the 4th is a bit iffy as, depending on the state of the empire, Karl II may have decided to intervene in the war, or could have used Italy as an excuse to attack the French himself. As for the 5th power, I expect that the current Vozny Zvinkov would still be leading Russia, and I assume that he would have already attempted to expand Russia to its old western borders, were it not for the threat of the entire world descending upon him if he did.
That sounds absolutely dreadful. You said earlier you suspected that the United States would have fallen into civil war. Do you have any idea who would have won? And if so, who would they have aided?
Honestly, American politics at the time were dreadfully complex. It would have all come down to who won the election. The coalition between Republican and Democrats was so flimsy that I'm honestly amazed that President Olson managed to hold it together and win. Had Senator Long or Reed won the presidency, it would be unlikely that the establishment would allow it to last. Most likely a general, such as Eisenhower or Chaffee, would have ousted the radical president, especially if some of their more daring plans were implemented immediately.
So, unlike the last Civil War, it would not be 2-sided, but 3-sided?
Well, in actuality, I suspect it could well have been a 4, maybe even 5-way war. If the military were to depose an elected government, I doubt some of the more Republican states in the West Coast would have remained loyal to Washington. And if Edward had taken control of Canada, well, it could have been possible to see the Mounties and Royal Rangers descending into New England and Alaska, in an attempt to buttress the true North against Reed's base of power in the Steel Belt.
Well, I for one am happy that none of this line of thought had ever come to pass. It would seem that our lives have been almost blessed.
As am I, sir, as am I. Thank you for having me this evening. I will be publishing a book on the subject in a few months. I'll send you a copy if you like.
Well, thank you for the generosity. And thank you for your insight, Professor. And of course, your time. And to everyone at home, thank you for tuning in to today's edition of Albion Air. If there's anything you'll take away from tonight's broadcast, is that it seems as though we are all well and truly blessed, like a beatified saint of old. A myth, a legend. We are living a life touched like a miracle. We have our freedom. We have our families. We have our lives. It seems as though, at the drop of a hat, the world could have been very different. This miracle of a world we live in will soon pass into almost myth, and with it, General Lawrence, and the men and women who fought for our freedoms, they too will be given a mythological status. But it's not a myth, it is our lives. They were just people who we should always give thanks to. It reminds me of the proverb, "From little acorns do mighty oaks grow." Lawrence was just one acorn that grew into one such oak. But it is you the listeners, you at home. You make up the forest. You too can change the world. Let us be sentimental just one last time, if I may. Tonight we close yet another chapter. Let's close off the story of General Lawrence with one last thing. For one last time, God bless you. God bless the King, and most importantly, God bless Lawrence of Britannia. Kaiser Cat Cinema needs you! Back the attack! Share our content, or dash over to our alt history website.
Hey everyone, Alex here. Thank you all so much for watching and listening to this episode of Radio Kaiserreich. As always, let me know in the comments down below what your favourite news article was from this broadcast. I hope you guys are strapped in tight as we have some massive projects coming your way in the spring and summer. As you might already know, I am working on a full narrative documentary Kaiserreich series, and Vincent is working on our first animatic series about the Second American Civil War. Along with that, we'll have our usual World of Kaiserreichs and, of course, the Kaiserreich radio releases for all our audio lovers. Furthermore, we just released our first album, The Divided States OST, on all major streaming platforms. You can get it on Spotify, just wherever you find music. So make sure to check out all of those and subscribe if you haven't already. Of course, none of this would be possible without our patrons continuing to back the attack. Our amount of patrons has almost doubled in the past month. We're now topping 60 Patreon backers. Wow, thank you guys. You also may have heard that patrons are making cameos in the Divided States animatic, where their portraits are being painted into background characters, which is a nice little extra for everyone joining. We want to welcome our newest patrons: Stephanie Taylor, Donovan Matthew, Luna Walter, Otto von Bismarck, Wilhelm Eriksson, Matt Davies, Kerncare13, Martin Svensson, Rogan, Richard, Douglas Arndell, Bryce Stotler, Alvin CM Engo, MJB, Jason Sanderson, Roclaw, and Will TP22. They are joining our top Patreon backers: Davo, Daniel Smith, Alexander, Mr. Knowledge, Lobster Man of New England Gang, Luke Downer, Casey DePrusen, Russell Apfel, and Ben Davenport. If you would like to support more Kaiserreich Radio, swing by our web shop and grab some merch. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Also, we love to see the projects that you make, whether that be fan art or your own custom Kaiserreich scenarios. We love to see your work, your creativity in the Kaiserverse. So please share with us your work as well. Alright, that's it from me. See you in the next one, cats.